Okay, and we're back. Fifth section of Night Watch. It's really dark because I'm recording this later at night than I usually would. So you can't really see me, but that's okay because you don't want to see me anyway. You want to hear the story. Okay, shall we carry on and see what's happening with Mr. Vimes? It was later. Pain had happened. Vimes lay on the hard cell bed and tried to make it go away. It hadn't been as bad as it might be. The mob hadn't even been able to organise a good seeing to. They didn't understand how a man could roll with the punches, and half the time they were getting in their own way. Was he enjoying this? Not the pain. He'd pass on the pain. In fact, he'd passed out on the pain. But there was that small part of him that he'd heard sometimes during strenuous arrests after long chases, the part that wanted to punch and punch long after punching had already achieved its effect. There was a joy to it. He called it the beast. It stayed hidden until you needed it, and then, when you needed it, out it came. Pain brought it out, and fear. He'd killed werewolves with his bare hands, mad with anger and terror and tasting, deep inside, the blood of the beast. And it was sniffing the air. "Hello, Mr. Vimes, ha-ha. I was wondering when you'd wake up." He sat up sharply. The cells were barred on the corridor side, but also between cells as well, on the basis that those caged ought to know they were in a cage. And in the next cell, lying with his hands behind his head, was Carcer. "Go on," said Carcer cheerfully. "Make a grab for me through the bars, eh? Want to see how long it takes before the guards arrive?" "At least they got you too," said Vimes. "Not for long, not for long. I smell of roses, me, ha-ha. Visitor to the city, got lost. Very helpful to the watch. So sorry to have bothered them. Here's a little something for their trouble. You shouldn't have stopped the watch taking bribes, Mr. Vimes. It makes an easier life all round, ha-ha." "Then I'll nail you some other way, Carcer." Carcer inserted a finger in his nose, wiggled it around, withdrew it, inspected its contents critically, and flicked them towards the ceiling. "Well, that's where it goes runny, Mr. Vimes. You see, I wasn't dragged in by 4 coppers. I didn't go around assaulting watchmen or trying to break into the university. I was knocking on the door. I believe you, Mr. Vimes, but you know what coppers are like. You look at 'em in a funny way and the buggers'll fit you up for every crime in the book. Terrible what they can pin on an honest man, ha-ha." Vimes knew it. "So you got some money," he said. "Of course, Mr. Vimes, I'm a crook, and the best part is, it's even easier to be a crook when no one knows you're a crook, ha-ha. But coppering depends on people believing you're a copper. A turn up for the old books, eh? You know we're back in the good old days, ha-ha." "It seems that way," Vimes admitted. He didn't like talking to Carcer, but right now he seemed to be the only real person around. "Where did you land, if I may ask?" "In the shades." "Me too. Couple of blokes tried to mug me where I lay. Me! I ask you, Mr. Vimes. Still, they had some money on them, so that worked all right. Yes, I think I'm going to be very happy here. Ah, here comes one of our brave lads." A watchman walked along the passage, swinging his keys. He was elderly, the kind of copper who gets given the jobs where swinging keys is more likely than swinging a truncheon, and his most distinguishing feature was a nose twice the width and half the length of the average nose. He stared at Vimes for a moment, then he passed on to Carcer's cell. He unlocked the door. "You, hop it," he said. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," said Carcer, hurrying out. He pointed to Vimes. "You want to watch that one, sir. He's an animal. Decent people shouldn't be locked up in the same cells, sir." "Hop it," I said. "Hopping it, sir. Thank you, sir." And Carcer, with a leery wink at Vimes, hopped it. The jailer turned to Vimes. "And what's your name here, mister?" "John Keel," said Vimes. "Yeah? Yeah, and I've had my kicking. Fair's fair. I'd like to go now." "Oh, you'd like that, would you? Yeah. You'd like me to hand you over these keys, yeah, and give you 5 pence from the poor box for your trouble, eh?" The man was standing very close to the bars, and with the grin of one who mistakenly thinks he's a wit when he's only half a one. And if Vimes's reflexes were quicker, and he'd bet they were, even now it'd be the work of a second to pull the old fool forcibly into the bars and spread his nose even further across his face. No doubt about it, the psychopaths had it the easy way. Just freedom would do, he said, resisting temptation. You ain't going anywhere, nyah, except to see the captain, said the jailer. That'll be Captain Tilden, said Vimes. Have I got that right? Smokes like a bonfire, got a brass ear and a wooden leg? Yeah, and he can have you shot, nyah. How'd you like them bananas? The cluttered desk of Vimes's memory finally unearthed an inadvertent saucer of recollection from under the teacup of forgetfulness. You're snouty, he said. Right? Some bloke broke your nose and it never got set properly, and your eyes water all the time, which is why they gave you permanent jail duty. Do I know you, mister? Said Snouty, peering at Vimes through suspicious running eyes. Me? No, said Vimes hastily. But I've heard people talk about you. Practically runs the watch-house, they said. Very fair man, they said. Firm but fair. Never spits in the gruel, never whittles in the tea, and never confuses his fruit either. The visible parts of Snouty's face contorted into the resentful scowl of someone who can't quite keep up with the script. Oh, yeah? He managed. Well, yeah, I've always kept a clean cell, that's very true. He looked a little nonplussed at the development, but managed another scowl. You stay there, mister, and I'll go and tell Captain you woke up. Vimes went back and lay on the bunk, staring at the badly spelled and anatomically incorrect graffiti on the ceiling. For a while there was a raised voice from upstairs, and with the occasional intrusive "nyah" from Snouty. Then he heard the jailer's footsteps on the stairs again. Well, he said, in the tone of someone looking forward to seeing a third party get what was coming to them. Turns out the captain wants to see you right away. Now, are you going to let me shackle you? Now, or do I have to call the lads down? Gods protect you, Vimes thought. Maybe it was true that the blow that had spread Snouty's nose across his face had scrambled his brain. You had to be a special kind of idiot to try and handcuff a dangerous prisoner all by yourself. If he'd tried it with Casa, for example, he'd have been a dead idiot 5 minutes ago. The jailer opened the door. Vimes stood up and presented his wrists. After a second's hesitation, Snouty handcuffed him. It always paid to be nice to a jailer. You might not get handcuffed behind your back. But a man with both hands in front of him had quite a lot of freedom. You go up the stairs first, said Snouty, and reached down and picked up a rather more efficient-looking crossbow than Vimes had seen last night. And if you even try to walk fast, mister, I'll shoot you, nyah, where you die slow. Very fair, said Vimes, very fair. He walked up the stairs very carefully, hearing Snouty's heavy breathing right behind him. Like many people of limited intellectual scope, Snouty did take what he could do very seriously. He'd shown a refreshing lack of compunction about pulling that trigger, for one thing. Vimes reached the top of the stairs and remembered to hesitate. "Nyah, turn left, you," said Snouty behind him. Vimes nodded to himself. Then the first on the right. It was all coming back to him in a great wave. This was Treacle Mine Road. This was his first watch-house. This was where it all began. The captain's door was open. The tired-looking old man behind the desk glanced up. "Be seated," said Tilden coldly. "Thank you, Snouty." Vimes had mixed memories of Captain Tilden. He'd been a military man before being given the job as a kind of pension, and that was a bad thing in a senior copper. It meant he looked to authority for orders and obeyed them, whereas Vimes found it better to look to authority for orders and then filter those orders through a fine mesh of common sense, adding a generous scoop of creative misunderstanding and maybe even incipient deafness if circumstances demanded, because authority rarely descended to street level. Tilden set too great a store by shiny breastplates and smartness on parade. You had to have some of that stuff, that was true enough. You couldn't let people slob around. But although he'd never voiced the view in public, Vimes liked to see a bit of battered armour around the place. It showed that someone had been battering it. Besides, when you were lurking in the shadows, you didn't want to gleam. There was an Ankh-Morpork flag pinned to one wall, the red faded to threadbare orange. Rumour had it that Tilden saluted it every day. There was also a very large silver inkstand with a gilt regimental crest on it, which occupied quite a lot of the desk. Snouty polished it every morning, and it shone. Tilden had never quite left the army behind. Still, Vimes retained a soft spot for the old man. He'd been a successful soldier, as these things went. He'd generally been on the winning side, and had killed more of the enemy by good if dull tactics than of his own men by bad but exciting ones. He'd been, in his own way, kind and reasonably fair. The men of the watch had run rings around him, without him ever noticing. Now Tilden was giving him the long stare with associated paperwork. It was supposed to mean, "We all know all about you, so why don't you tell us all about yourself?" But he really wasn't any good at it. Vimes returned the stare blankly. "What's your name again?" said Tilden, becoming aware that Vimes was the better starer. "Keel," said Vimes. "John Keel. And what the hell? Look," he said, "you've only got one piece of paper there that means anything, and that's the report from the sergeant, assuming he can write." "As a matter of fact, I have 2 pieces of paper," said the captain. "The other one concerns the death of John Keel. What?" "What? For a scrap with the watch?" "In the current emergency that would be quite sufficient for the death penalty," said Tilden, leaning forward. "But, perhaps it won't be necessary in this case, because John Keel died yesterday. You beat him up and robbed him, what? You took his money, but you didn't bother with the letters because your sort can't read, what? So you wouldn't have known that John Keel was a policeman, what?" "What?" Vimes stared at the skinny face with its triumphantly bristling moustache and the small, faded blue eyes. And then there was the sound of someone industriously sweeping the floor on the corridor outside. The captain looked past him, growled, and hurled a pen. "Get him out of here!" he barked. "What's that little devil doing here at this time of night, anyway?" Vimes turned his head. There was a skinny, wizened-looking man standing in the doorway, bearded and as bald as a baby. He was grinning stupidly and holding a broom. "He's cheap, sir, and it's best if he comes in when it's, quiet," Snouty murmured, grabbing the little man by a stick-thin elbow. "Come on, out you get, Mr. Lousy." So now the crossbow wasn't pointing at Vimes, and he had several pounds of metal on his wrists, or, to put it another way, his arms were a hammer. He went to stand up. Vimes woke up and stared at the ceiling. There was a deep rumbling somewhere. Treadmill? Watermill? It was going to be a corny line, but some things you had to know. "Where am I?" he said, and then he added, "this time." "Well done," said a voice somewhere behind him. "Consciousness to sarcasm in 5 seconds. The room was large by the feel of the air, and the play of light on the walls suggested there were candles alight behind Vimes. The voice said, I'd like you to think of me as a friend." "A friend? Why?" said Vimes. There was a smell of cigarette smoke in the air. "Everyone ought to have a friend," said the voice. "Ah, I see you've noticed you're still handcuffed." The voice said this because in one movement Vimes had swung himself off the table and plunged forward. Vimes woke up and stared at the ceiling. There was a deep rumbling somewhere nearby. Treadmill? Watermill? Then his thoughts knotted themselves most unpleasantly. "What," he said, "just happened?" "I thought you might like to try that again, lad," said the invisible friend. "We have little tricks here, as you will learn. Just sit up. I know you've been through a lot, but we don't have time for messing about. This is sooner than I'd like, but I thought I'd better get you out of there before it went really runny. Mr. Vimes." Vimes froze. "Who are you?" he said. "It's Loot C officially, Mr. Vimes, but you can call me Sweeper, since we're friends." Vimes sat up carefully and looked around. The shadowy cells were covered with writing. It must be writing, he thought, but the Hubland type of writing, which is only one step away from being little pictures. The candle was standing on a saucer. Some way behind it, just visible in the shadows, were 2 cylinders, each as wide as a man and twice as long, set in a massive horizontal bearings, one above the other. Both were turning slowly, and both gave the impression of being a lot bigger than their mere dimensions suggested. Their rumble filled the room. There was a strange violet haze around them. 2 yellow-robed figures tended the cylinders, but Vimes' eye was drawn to the skinny little bald man sitting on an upturned crate by the candle. He was smoking a foul roll-up of the sort favoured by Nobby. He looked like a foreign monk. In fact, he looked exactly the kind Vimes occasionally saw with begging bowls in the street. "You're looking fit, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper. "You were in the watch-house, right?" said Vimes. "Snouty called you lousy." "Yes, Mr. Vimes, Loot C. I've been sweeping up there every night for the past 10 days. All for 2p and all the kicks I can't dodge. Just waiting for you." "And you told Rosie Palm where I'd gone, too. You were the monk on the bridge." "Right again. Couldn't be sure she'd catch up." "How do you know who I am?" "Don't get excited, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper calmly. "I'm here to help you, Your Grace. And I'm your friend, because right now I'm the only person in the world who'll probably believe anything you tell me about, thunderstorms and falls, that sort of thing. At least," he added, "the only sane person." He watched Vimes as the man sat quite still for half a minute. "Good, Mr. Vimes," said Sweeper. "Thinking. I like that in a man." "This is magic, right?" said Vimes at last. "Something like that, yes," said Sweeper. "For instance, just now we moved you back in time. Just a few seconds, just so you wouldn't do anything you'd regret. Can't say I blame you for wanting to have a go at someone after all you've been through, but we don't want any harm to come to you, do we?" "Ha! I almost had my hands around your throat." Sweeper smiled. It was a disarmingly little smile. "Smoke?" he said. He fumbled in his robe and produced a ragged hand-rolled cigarette. "Thanks, but I've got my own." Vimes began automatically. His hand stopped halfway to his pocket. "Oh, yes," said Sweeper. "The silver cigar case. Sybil gave it to you as a wedding present, right? Shame about that." "I want to go home," said Vimes. It came out as a whisper. He hadn't been sleeping in the past 12 hours, merely recovering. This time it was Sweeper who sat in silence, apart from the rumble of the cylinders. "You're a policeman, Mr. Vimes," he said eventually. "Well, I'd like you to believe for a while that I'm a sort of policeman too, all right? Me and my colleagues. We see that things happen. Or don't happen. Don't ask questions right now. Just nod." Vimes shrugged instead. "Good. And let's say on our patrol we found you, as it might be, in a metaphorical kind of way, lying in the gutter on a Saturday night singing a rude song about wheelbarrows. I don't know any rude songs about wheelbarrows." Sweeper sighed. "Hedgehogs, custard, one-string fiddles, it really doesn't matter. Now, we've found you a long way from where you should be, and we'd like to get you home, but it's not as easy as you might think. I've gone back in time, haven't I? It was that bloody library. Everyone knows the magic in there makes strange things happen." "Well, yes. It was mainly that, yes. It's more true to say that you got caught up in a major event. Can anyone get me back? Can you get me back?" "Well," said Sweeper, looking awkward. "Wizards can if you can't," said Vimes. "I'll go and see them in the morning." "Oh, you will you? I'd like to be there when you do," said Sweeper. "These ain't the wizards under decent old Ridcully, you know, and you're not His Grace Commander Sir Samuel Vimes, neither. You're a rough-looking devil who'll be burbling a story about thunderstorms and flying through time to a bunch of rather devious and unpleasant men. You'll be lucky if they only laugh at you. Anyway, even if they wanted to be helpful, they'd hit the same problem." "And what's that?" "It can't be done. Not yet." For the first time in the conversation, Sweeper looked ill at ease. "The big problem I'm facing, Mr. Vimes, is that I ought to tell you a few things that I'm not, in any circumstances, allowed to tell you. But you're a man who isn't happy until he knows the facts. I respect that. Unless you're satisfied, you won't help us. I know I can't expect you to believe me." The noise of the big cylinders changed for a moment, and Vimes felt a very slight shock, a suggestion that his whole body had just gone plib. So here's someone you might believe." "Hold it. said Vimes, still staring at him. "What happened to your cigarette?" You were holding half a roll-up and now it's gone." "I finished it 10 minutes ago," said Sweeper. "Roll 'em, boys." The tone of the spinning cylinders changed slightly. Sam Vimes saw himself standing in the middle of the room. "That's me!" "Yeah, right," said Sweeper. "Now listen to the man." "Hello, Sam," said the other Vimes, staring not quite at him. "I can't see you, but they tell me you can see me. Remember the smell of lilac? You thought about those who died. And then you told Willikins to hose down that kid. And, you've got a pain in your chest you're a bit worried about, but you haven't told anyone. That's about enough, I think. You know I'm you. Now, there's some things I can't tell you. I can know them because I'm in a—" The speaker stopped and looked away as if he was taking instructions from someone off stage. "A closed loop. You could say I'm 20 minutes of your life you don't recall. Remember when you had—" A sensation that his whole body had just gone plib. Sweeper stood up. "I hate to do this," he said, "but we're in the temple and we can pretty much dampen out the paradoxes. On your feet, Mr. Vimes. I'm going to tell you everything." "You just said you couldn't." Sweeper smiled. "Need any help with those handcuffs?" "What, these old Capstick Mark I's? No, just give me a nail in a couple of minutes. How come I'm in a temple?" "I brought you here." "You carried me?" "No, you walked with me. Blindfolded, of course. And then, when you were here, I gave you a little drink." "I don't remember that." "Of course not. That was the purpose of the drink. Now, not very mystical, but it does the job. We don't want you coming back here, now do we? The place is supposed to be a secret." "You messed up my memory. Now you see here." Vimes half stood, but Sweeper held up his hands placatingly. Don't worry. It just made you forget a few minutes," he said. "How many minutes?" Just a few. And it had herbs in it. Good for you, herbs. And then we let you sleep. Don't worry, no one is after us. They'll never know where you've gone. See these things here?" Excuse me for one moment.